to the Snakeherder Podcast.
Hello, and welcome back to another Snakeherder Podcast. This is episode 2, brought to you by my friends at Reptile Rapture in Monona, Wisconsin. Also check them out on the web at reptilerapture.net. So, what are we going to get into for episode 2? Well, I figured it's October. It's the time of year when most of us who work with ball pythons and who breed them, and pythons in general for that matter, start thinking about breeding season. This is when I would normally be starting to cycle, use temperature changes to incite breeding. So I thought it would be a good opportunity, a good timing for me to discuss that and kind of tell you guys how I do it. And there's no one way to do this. There's many ways. And I thought I would just go over the way that I choose to do things with my particular setup. You guys can choose to compare it to how you like to do things, or if you're looking for a way to improve upon what you already do, some of the things I do might be helpful to you and might be interesting to you otherwise. The people who do this for a living, people with big collections who breed every year, obviously they're not going to need this help from me, but it might be interesting to you just to hear how somebody with a different style of setup does things. And, I'm always all ears if you want to let me know if you think I left something out, or if you think that something I said doesn't work for you or for somebody else for one reason or another. Please feel free to contact me at snakeherder@gmail.com. Always happy to hear criticisms, compliments, input of any kind. I'm all ears. So anyway, first and foremost, I think that what we should talk about here with regards to this is whether or not it's even necessary. I have talked to several people who, when you talk about temperature cycling to incite breeding with ball pythons in particular, who just say it's a big waste of time. They say all you need are mature animals, put them together when you see fit, and chances are they're going to breed for you, and you're going to get eggs, and as long as you take care of everything, success just happens. That's very, very likely true, but I do think there are some advantages to doing what I do, or some form of cycling. If nothing else, what I think it brings to the table is predictability. When I do things the way I do them, I know when to expect eggs. Sure, things go wrong, things change. Sometimes things don't happen the way you expect or the way you plan, but quite regularly, I've had a lot of seasons where I've had many female ball pythons that are all being bred, and the ones that are, plenty big enough and that are cycled appropriately, I tend to get all of my clutches within 4 to 6 week range, which to me just shows that what I'm doing is having a definite impact, and it's getting the results I'm after. It's getting eggs that are all right around the same age. So, I have no doubt in my personal mind that what I do is working. So whether or not it'll work for you, I couldn't say for sure, because no two setups are identical. But I have used this particular recipe, I guess you could say, in 2 different rooms in my house. And then now that I have a snake building, I continued, but I was able to start manipulating ambient temperatures a little more too, which I think was helpful. When I was working out of my house, I was always kind of at the mercy of what's comfortable for my family. I can't say, oh no, we can't open the windows in the house because it's going to screw up my breeding season. If it's a nice day out and people want fresh air, I got to open the windows in my house. So anyway, when I moved everything out to the snake building, I'm able to completely control now everything right down to ambient. And to me, that just added extra control. And once I did that, everything got even tighter. My schedule got much, the eggs started hitting cage floors at a much shorter interval from each other. So I really do think that what I'm doing is working. So for starters, let's talk about the conditions of the animals themselves. What you need for minimum sizes, I guess, is a good way to look at it. A lot of people use that benchmark. They'll say the third winter, a female's third winter, she can be bred. Males will usually breed in their second winter. Now, considering most of them are born in the summertime, a female in her third winter is usually 2.5 years old, maybe. And so she's about 3 when those eggs start being laid. I have had many females that have bred in their third winter, and everything went just fine. Those are usually females, though, that are ideal feeders from the word go. I've never had any issues getting them to eat. Ones that don't turn down meals, they get those good ones that'll eat when they're in shed, and they grow perfectly, and, that's great when that happens. That's not always the case. Sometimes you get a finicky one that doesn't want to eat for one reason or another in different time frames, and that can slow things down. So I honestly, when everything's going great, I don't hesitate to breed a female in her third winter. But there are some advantages, I think, to being patient and waiting for that fourth winter. A female that's that far along, if she's been a good grower and breeder, or a good grower and feeder, I should say, is going to have, it's almost certain she's going to breed for you in that fourth winter. She's also likely to give you a better clutch or bigger clutch. I've had a couple of females that have laid bad clutches if you breed them in their third winter and they're right on the, just big enough to breed. I understand when you're talking about a hobby that takes years to get to where what you're trying to achieve, it's hard to be patient. I can admit that it's really hard for me sometimes to convince myself to wait till that fourth winter. But when I've done that, I've tend to get bigger clutches. So, it takes a couple of seasons for that to even out to where you're getting more eggs per female. But, it's great to get, those seven eggs and up in a first clutch is great. Whereas a lot of times I usually see the average to be 4 to 5 eggs for that first clutch, sometimes 6 if I'm breeding them in that third season. So anyway, there is an advantage to waiting with the females. Now, gram-wise, size-wise, I've heard a lot of different benchmarks. When I first got interested in ball pythons, people used to say 1,000 grams. They used to say if your female's 1,000 grams and up, you can breed her. That is a small female for breeding. I've known people who have done it with 1,200 gram females, 13, 14. That to me, that's pushing it. I think the smallest female I ever bred was around 1,450 grams going into the breeding season. So she continued to eat throughout that season, and by the time she was actually gravid, she was bigger than that. I like to say 1,500 grams is my bare minimum. If a female is 1,500 grams going into October, I'm pretty comfortable breeding her for that first year. I prefer to see them 1,600 and up. But, that's, and I'm not going to, chastise anybody for going one side or the other of that. It's your own risk to take because there are complications that can arise from breeding a female that's too small. They can become egg bound and have trouble with delivery. So I don't recommend it. I just feel it'd be irresponsible for me to say, yeah, sure, go ahead, man. Everybody should breed their snakes at 1,400 grams. You'll do great. I think it's a better idea to wait for 1,500 to 1,600 grams. That's just personal opinion, personal preference. So that's basically my minimum for a female. Minimum, I say 1,500 grams and third winter. If she's 1,500 grams going into October of her third fall or winter, then I say you're good to go. But if you can wait till that fourth winter and, by then you should be, easily should be over that 1,600 gram mark if you've got a good feeding snake. And that's going to, you can be a lot more confident working with that. So that's just the way I look at it. That's what I prefer. As far as males go, I have had bad luck with males breeding in their second winter. I've had it happen plenty of times, but I have had several projects where I thought, I'll just get the male a year later for this particular project and everything will be fine. Like I mentioned in my last podcast, the first time I ever bred het pieds. I had a 2007 female and a 2008 male. And that female was a great feeder and a great grower, and she was good to go for her third winter. And I put that male in with her, and he was around 600 grams, which is what I consider kind of my minimum. And he did not want to have anything to do with her. He would sit in the furthest corner from her in that cage for the entirety of the time he was in there. Nothing happened. And I ended up putting another male in, wondering if maybe she wasn't receptive, but that other male locked up with her that day. It was like piece of cake for a big mature male. That little male was scared of her. The following year, he bred with her just fine. When he was in his third winter, he bred her, and I got my first 2 piebalds, and that was great. But my piebald project was a year late because of me deciding to get a younger male than the female. So once in a while, you're going to get those shy males that don't want to breed. I've heard tell of different ways of inciting a male to be more likely to breed. They say younger males, if they're around a female sometimes for intervals leading into the breeding season, that'll make them more likely. It may or may not be true. I have no idea. I've never tried that. I just don't understand what the advantage would be. I've had shy sand boas for breeding that putting them in with another male for 5 minutes and, supervising them, making sure that there couldn't be any real, any damage or any real fighting, but having a second male in its proximity for a few minutes even seemed to put a bit of a sense of urgency into the bigger male. And again, it requires having a smaller male than, if the one that you want to breed is smaller than the one you expose him to, he's likely to be that much more intimidated and that much less likely to breed. So I'm not a big fan of the whole, they call it combating males. It's not a thing I do. I've did it with sand boas and it did help me, but I had a perfect setup as far as I had a male that was significantly smaller, but not so much smaller that I had to worry about anything. And I watched him like a hawk. So worked for me that time, and that's about it. I've never tried it with pythons. I just don't feel the need. If I get a male that's not going to breed for me this year, I find an alternative. And if it's, something with a recessive and I don't have something else as an alternative, I don't breed her that year, and I just let her get that much bigger. It's real easy to say that. It's a lot harder to do it. So that's what I look at as about 600 grams for a male and about 1,500 grams for a female, and essentially you have a mature pair of animals that by all rights should breed for you. Let's talk temperatures now, because that's realistically what this all boils down to. Now, I guess the most logical starting point would be to talk about what my year-round, my summertime temperature, I guess you could call it, is what my maintenance temperatures are. And that's another thing you can get a lot of different people with a lot of different opinions of what's the appropriate hotspot, what's the appropriate ambient. What I've done has always resulted in healthy animals. I've never had a respiratory infection. I have no reason to think that what I'm doing is in any way, shape, or form less than ideal. So if your temperature numbers vary by a few degrees, chances are it's not very significant. But my summer maintenance temperatures, I keep my snake room at 72 degrees from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., and I drop it by maybe 2 degrees from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. So I have like a 12-hour cycle of just, basically 72 degrees is essentially my ambient temperature in my snake room, with just a couple of degrees of drop. Now, if I get a warm day in the summer where the temperature comes up to, 75, 78 degrees in here, once it breaks 80, I unplug the hot spots in my cages. I figure 80 degrees ambient is plenty warm for a day or two of no hot spot. And that also plays into whether or not they've been fed. I actually you don't want them to get too hot when they've been fed, because that's almost as bad as too cold. So normally I'm looking for 70 to 72 degrees ambient, and then the hot spot in the cage I keep at 90 to 92 degrees. Now, that's not what I have my thermostat set at. A lot of times different thermostats and different probe placements. Right now I have a rack running that's set at 100 degrees. Hot spot is 92. That's what the difference is. My probe is on the outside of the tubs taped to the heat tape. So when that probe is 100 degrees in that spot, the hot spot in my cages is 92. Now, you have to play with that and figure it out for yourself. That's why I think the laser temp gun is like the be-all, end-all, most important tool you can have for keeping ball pythons. Because you can't just, for one thing, even the thermostat probe, even though it says it's at 100, it may not be 100. They all read differently. They're calibrated to, by different people in different places. I don't believe what the dial says. I find, that's before I put snakes in the cages, I spend time with the setup, let it cycle for a day, check my temps until I get everything to where my hot spot is at 90 to 92 degrees. So that's, and that stays that temperature 24/7. I don't have a nighttime temperature drop on my hot spot. So that's my, basically from around January 1st through October, that's what I'm running at. Right around the beginning of October, I start doing a nighttime temperature drop. So from 7 a.m. or 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., I lower my hot spot by a degree or two every night until I get down to 85 degrees. So eventually I'm running from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. I'm still running that 90 to 92 degree hot spot, but at night it's dropping down to 85. My ambient temperatures then I'm setting to drop down to 68. So I get a little bit more significant ambient temperature drop. It's about 4 degrees instead of a degree or two. And then also the hot spot is dropping by, a significant amount. When now I'm getting like a 7 degree difference in my hot spot to go along with that 4 degree ambient. They can notice that difference in the temperature that, and it takes me a couple of weeks of, dropping by a degree or two a night till I get, or every other night even, and this is all kind of, I don't structure it super tight. I don't have a calendar where I'm marking things off. Just every couple of days I drop a degree until I get to what I consider, my ideal nighttime. This is my winter now, is when they get this 85 degree hot spot at night, which is still warm enough to where they can digest food. It's, but they can feel that difference. The other thing I do is, the first time I ever did this, I used a optical sensor on my Helix thermostat, which I was using the light in the room. When the lights go out, it would cause the temperature drop. So I actually cycled my lights, was how I, that went in conjunction with it. I'm a little less concerned with that anymore. It seems like the temperatures do it a lot more than the light cycle does. But I eventually then, I start extending the night times though, and eventually my nighttime temperatures get to be from 5 p.m. to 7 a.m. So I end up with an extra, instead of being 12 on, 12 off, I have a 14-hour nighttime. So they have a longer night and a cooler night. And, that seems to, it takes about, and then after I get to that temperature where I'm running 5 p.m. to 7 a.m. at my cool temperatures, about a couple of weeks after that, right around Halloween, I spend about a month getting things to where I want them for my winter temps. And right around Halloween is when I start putting males in with females. So through November and into December is when I'm usually actively breeding my males. If I'm putting them together, usually once I start doing this, I start seeing tail locks and first or second introductions. And I put them together for 2-3 days, then I take them apart for the rest of the week, and then I feed them, change water bowls and everything, and put them back together for a couple of days. And I keep doing that until I stop seeing activity. If I don't see activity right away, I might give them a week apart or 2 weeks even before I reintroduce. I don't keep putting the male in there if they're not breeding. And I may evaluate once it's getting later in the year if I want to put in a backup male, put in a different one. But usually, I really have rarely had problems unless it's a small young male like I discussed earlier. Usually I'm going to get my breeding activity nearly instantly. And I keep doing that until I stop seeing breeding activity. Then somewhere around December 1st, I go back to 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. So instead of having the nights are no longer than the days. After about a week of that, I start raising the temperatures again by both the ambient and the hot spot by a degree or two a night. And by January 1st, I'm back to the summer maintenance temperatures. By then, the males usually have lost interest in the females, or the females are no longer, allowing them to breed. So at that point, I pretty much assume the job is done. Right around this point is where I start paying close attention to sheds, because those are going to be your little signposts that are going to give you timeline markers. another thing about sheds. You'll hear people say quite regularly that it's a good idea to put males in with females right after they shed and leave that shed skin in there. And I don't see anything wrong with that, but don't wait for that shed cycle to finish and for her to shed before you put the males in there. If it's the day you planned on putting the male in and she's blue, she's, opaque and getting ready to shed, put that male in there, because I get males lock up with females that are in blue all the time. I don't put males in that are in blue because I think that they're preoccupied and not as interested in breeding. They're like most animals. The males are good to go, but if the male isn't interested, then nothing's going to happen. But the males will pursue the female if she's in blue, and I think that the female tends to put up less resistance. I get tons of breeding activity when the female is opaque and the male isn't. So that's and if it's during the breeding season and a female's in blue, a lot of times a good healthy female is in the follicle growth stage at this time of year, and that's a good time for them to be breeding. It's once a female ovulates, there's no more sense in any more breeding, because that means those eggs are fertilized. The eggs are not fertilized until the moment of ovulation. So I start writing down shed cycles in January. I don't really pay that close attention to shed cycles any other time, or during the maintenance part of the year. But starting in January, I start writing down sheds, and I start checking on her basically 30 days after any shed. I start keeping an eye on her, and I start watching for ovulation. So after January 1st, and I see a shed, 20 to 30, 40 days later, I start watching her very closely to watch for any signs of ovulation. You'll read about ovulations, and you'll see pictures and videos where a lot of times ovulations are blatant. They always say it looks like the female ate a football. I don't think that in a lot of cases, especially if your female is just big enough to be breeding, I don't think it's as obvious as everybody seems to think. Maybe it's because I tend to catch it at the early end or the late end of it, because I don't stand there and watch them nonstop. But I've had a lot of times where I've even taken pictures going, is this an ovulation? I think this is an ovulation. I'm not sure. And then I go back and I check my notes after everything has happened, and once I have eggs, and I can say either, oh yeah, that's about when she would have ovulated, or, oh wow, that was way off. That definitely wasn't an ovulation. I've kind of had both cases. I think I usually recognize it, but I don't worry. If I don't see an ovulation, I'm certainly not afraid that nothing happened. Then once you do get an ovulation, if you think you saw one, start watching for your next shed cycle. Will usually happen 3 or 4 weeks after that after the ovulation. And that next shed cycle then is going to be your pre-egg laying shed, and that's the one that's critical to me. That's why I start writing down sheds, because I want to know when that pre-egg laying shed is. That one is a really good predictor. And if that female has shed and it's the pre-egg laying shed, you're going to see some obvious signs after that. The female is going to be very round. The belly is no longer look so flat. They tend to look like there's not a flat side anymore, like they'll just roll over. And speaking of rolling over, you will see them lay on their sides. You'll see them lay on their backs. They start looking uncomfortable. It's obvious something's going to happen. So if I see a shed and then female starts acting weird, laying on her back, laying on the hot spot on her side, things like that, I know that last shed was that pre-egg laying shed. Usually then in my setup, the way I described it now, where I have my snake building and the ambient and everything is so constant, I get my eggs almost 30 days on the nose every time after that shed. Within a day or two either side of it. When I was keeping them in my house, the first year I ever bred ball pythons, it was 45 days after that shed before I got eggs out of either of my 2 females that laid. That's why I thought, it was my first time doing it, and I thought, I did something wrong. Something's not what I thought was. These females aren't laying eggs. It's been 35, 40 days and nothing happened. I think I just missed the boat again, and then they happened on day 45. But my ambient temperatures in my house were cold then, and I was struggling to keep temperatures where I needed them because I was using these vision racks, which I absolutely loved the racks, but they're heated with cable. And I would have one tub would be 6 degrees hotter than the tub directly below it. I just could not get consistent hot spot temperatures and just consistent warmth. And so I had some really late egg laying from that particular year, and I think it was because my ambient was so cold. So if your temperatures are really on point, and as I described them, you should have you shouldn't be much more than a couple of days either side of that 30-day mark. So that's why it's just critical to know when you got that shed. I start at day like 25 or so. I'm checking on that female every morning, every midday, and every evening that I can. I'm trying to make sure that I know when those eggs happen. And almost always I get it right around 30 days. So if you've done everything up to this point and now 30 days later you got eggs, and there's nothing better than, if I see a female in the process of egg laying, I won't watch it. It kills me to do it, but I got to close the door and walk out of the room and leave her alone for hours. I don't want to open that cage, that tub, that rack, whatever you got, until that female's in the beehive, which is, they coil around those eggs and they look like a little pile, and it's just the most beautiful sight. This female looks like a little beehive sitting in the cage with her head on top, and you just get a little glimpse of white sticking around either side of her head or somewhere, and that's when it's time to take the female off and get the eggs in the incubator. And I've normally had really easy time getting females off of the eggs. They tend to huff and puff and hiss a lot. Usually they don't even strike. You can usually just grab a hold of them, unwind them from the eggs. Be careful not to let any of the eggs roll. I've had one female that I'm sure I'll talk about more in the future. That was one of the most aggressive snakes I've ever owned. Female ball python, het caramel. She was, I raised her from the time she was 100 grams, and that snake tried to bite me at every chance it had for the entirety of the time I owned it. That just strike. The first time I took her off of eggs, I pulled her tub out of the rack, and she just abandoned the eggs to come right after me. Only female ball python I've ever seen act like that. Most of them will just hunker down on the eggs and hiss at you, but don't even strike when you pull them off the eggs. Two different things, though, that I do recommend. You can either just put like a dish rag, something over the female's head, or a light towel so that they don't see you reaching in there. The other thing is, if you've got some leather, like I actually have a pair of snake handling gloves. They're or just for reptiles in general. They're kind of big and bulky, and they have kind of gauntlets around your wrists, and they look silly. But it has way less to do with not wanting to get bit and more to do with not wanting that female to see something warm coming at her while she's sitting on her eggs. I think it just hides my heat signature of my hands. It makes me smell less like an animal. There's something about, I put gloves on quite regularly when I remove a female, even if I don't expect her to strike. I think for the female's well-being, it makes them calmer. They seem to be less twitchy around that than when your warm hands are coming at them and grabbing at them. So a lot of times I just try to lessen the stress on the female. So you unwind your female from your eggs. The first thing I do is I put her in, especially if you're using racks. And realistically, most people who are going to breed snakes are going to have them in a rack system. It's really good to have a tub that's completely clean, fresh bedding, fresh water bowl, all new stuff in there, and no trace of scent of the eggs or anything. And I will take the female out of her, off of her eggs, and put her in this brand new clean cage and put it back in the rack with fresh, clean water. And, then I've heard other people say that they like to bathe the female. They'll wash them with like dish soap and water and all this, and to get the scent of the eggs off of the female. I really think that adds more stress than it prevents. I don't think the scent of the eggs on the female doesn't really seem to cause an issue to me. I've heard people talk about it. If you put them back in that same cage, they'll coil around the spot where the eggs were, like they can still smell them, and they'll say any scent of that egg will potentially keep that female off a feed and keep them in that brooding condition. I don't think that so much scent from the egg sticks to the female that she needs to be washed. I think, like I've had hatchlings, and when you got to rinse vermiculite off of them and stuff. I think that there's very few things that ball pythons enjoy less than being sprayed with water. So to me, that's just a stress factor that is not necessary. And if you feel the need, go by all means, go right ahead. But I've never done it, and I've never had an issue. I put my female in the clean cage so that there's no scent of the eggs in the cage, and then clean the original tub really good once I get the eggs out of there and in my incubator. And, end of story. Usually, and I've heard people say that females will take a month to get back to feed. I can almost always get them eating within a week. I don't wash the female. I put her in a clean cage, and I give them 5 days of rest and make sure they got good clean water every day. And after 5 days, I offer them a rat. And usually they'll take it. I might offer, in a slightly smaller meal than average. And usually then I'll follow that one up with another one, 3 to 5 days later. I give them another meal. If they're going to eat, then usually they'll go right back on feed hardcore. And I've really never had a female refuse a rat a week after laying eggs. So that's what everybody says. The bath, the bathing the female is all about getting them back on food. And I've never had that be a problem, and I've never done that. So to me, it's just something I don't need to do. So realistically, that's in a nutshell how I do things. It's really not that hard. It's just a short season where I drop the temperatures and then I bring them back up again. And once, I breed them when it's cool. And once the temperatures start coming up, usually they stop breeding. The females start ovulating, and it's really pretty simple. And I've talked to a lot of people, a lot of different ways to do this. And so I can't help but think that it probably is not necessary, but I think that it, as I stated earlier, it gives me predictability. I know when my eggs are coming. I know what's going to happen. And to me, that's a really good thing. One more thing just on that topic of knowing when things are going to happen and the predictability. Another reason to do that is, you may have heard people talk about males going off of feed during breeding season. I don't tend to have that very often. I have 1 or 2 males that I've had in the past that decide they don't want to eat when they're in the mood to breed, and it doesn't really last very long. And but it can happen. So that's one reason why people say it's important not to ignore your males when you're bulking up your females, giving them extra meals, trying to get them big enough to breed, make sure they have enough weight. They say it's a good idea to make sure your males are bulked up too, so if they go off feed that there's no real ill effects. But I find that fat, older males don't breed as good. They just aren't as interested. They don't care as much. Lean males, I think, are good breeders. And so I've never been one to really bulk my males up too big. And another thing then is that having this, as I like to call it, a prescribed breeding season, I think that makes these leaner males, if they are going to go off feed, it's predictable. They're going to go back on feed. When that temperature goes up and the females stop breeding, they're going to start eating again. And so that's one advantage of that. Whereas if you have just kind of a year-round, I throw my males in whenever I feel like it, and if nothing happens, I take them out and I try again and all that. That's a way to do things, but the thing is, if you get a male that is one of those ones that isn't going to want to eat when it's breeding season, an extended breeding season is simply going to extend the amount of time that male is off of food. So I've heard of people saying that a male that gets bred throughout the year without a schedule can sometimes, end up not being a good feeder because he's always thinking about the possibility of breeding and he's not interested in food. So this prescribed breeding season that I use, it does keep any fasting to a very short segment of time, and it gives me, it makes it okay for me to have lean males. And when I say lean, I don't mean skinny, I don't mean undersized, I just mean I'm not trying to make them fat. They don't look like my females. My females, and again, I don't believe in power feeding and trying to bulk up a female to make sure she's at that breeding size. That's another reason for that fourth winter thing is when you've got it in your head that this female has to breed in this third winter, it's really easy to let her, to put too much food in her. And if she misses a meal, you start to feel like, oh geez, I lost ground, and that's really no way to you shouldn't be stressed over your female missing a meal. So, that's kind of the long and short of how I like to do things. So, it's not rocket science, but it requires a little bit of forethought. So let me know what you guys think. Does this work for you? Have you done something similar? Do you do something different? It's an individual decision how you're going to do it. And, I love to hear the way other people do things. And let me know if this has been helpful to you or not. And again, as always, feel free to email me at snakeherder@gmail.com. And that, you got a topic you want covered, that's great. Let's hear about it. I'm not going to decide what the next topic is going to be yet. I have a lot of things to choose from, but I promise there's going to be another podcast coming really soon. And I'd like to thank Reptile Rapture, as usual, for sponsoring us and being a part of this. And make sure you check them out. Check me out on Facebook at Snakeherder Constrictors. Check me out on the web at snakeherder.com. And email me at snakeherder@gmail.com. This is Matt Nauman once again, thanking you for tuning in to another Snakeherder podcast. Until next time, take care.